Hail to the thief, Commander Bobby Thompson.
This story went from a dilapidated, rundown duplex all the way to the White House.
Thompson's a Harvard-educated lawyer claiming to run a $100 million charity for veterans.
This organization had collected millions of dollars, promising to give that to veterans who needed it, and in turn, doing far from that.
Veterans get pennies, and the commander uses the proceeds as a political slush fund.
Is it just politics as usual, or is there something deeper going on? I still don't know the answer.
When his crime is uncovered, Thompson dares investigators to find out where he is and who he is.
We thought we were chasing Jason Bourne. The guy was a ghost.
I can't help but wonder, who is this man?
He's a man who thinks he can remain a fugitive forever, using his own intelligence training and other people's money.
It's the motherlode. This is more money than I've ever seen in one spot.
April 16th, 2012. Security cameras roll, capturing a man as he enters a storage facility in Portland, Oregon. He was once an intelligence officer, a master of disguise who felt at home in the corridors of power. Now, beaten down after decades on the run, his life is a tangle of lies, and each step is a struggle. He's on his way to locker 646, where he stashed the secrets to his very survival. To authorities, he's known as Mr. X, a fitting name for a man cloaked in mystery.
The mystery has not been unraveled, and might be stranger than what we already know.
Dr. Patrick Bray knows that service to country involves great sacrifice. The Navy paid for him to go to medical school and sent him all over the world.
As a Navy doctor, I know firsthand some of the hardships that this works on people. You know, it's tough to be deployed if your wife's pregnant and you're not going to be there and they're having troubles at home. It's difficult.
After leaving the military, Bray practices medicine in Cleveland, Ohio. In 2007, he gets a call from a fundraiser.
I'm usually hang up right away on a telemarketer, but he said Navy, and that kept me on the phone.
Representatives of a charity called the U.S. Navy Veterans Association tell Bray they're sending care packages to troops and supporting local vets in need. They aren't asking for much, and Bray writes them 2 checks totaling $300.
Just the name was, sounded legitimate. U.S. Navy veterans. Who's against that?
As Ohio Attorney General Mike DeWine will later see, Bray is just one target among thousands in a relentless telemarketing blitz.
I think most Americans have a soft spot in their heart for veterans and feel that we owe them a lot.
Claiming a history dating back to 1927, the U.S. Navy Veterans Association, or USNVA, says it has 66,000 members, 41 state chapter offices, and a headquarters in Washington, D.C. Its CEO, Jack Nimitz, shares a last name with Chester Nimitz, commander of the Pacific Fleet during World War II. In Ohio, Assistant Attorney General Brad Tamaro says the USNVA seems like the right organization at the right moment.
I think at this time in our history, there is a strong patriotic feeling. There's a strong desire to help the veterans that are coming back from Afghanistan and Iraq.
The charity has been recognized by the Department of Veterans Affairs and granted tax-exempt status by the IRS. 41 states allow the association to operate after it files registration documents and keeps them current year after year. Though these papers list scores of officers, in truth, one man is behind it all, Commander Bobby Thompson. Thompson says he's a retired Navy lieutenant commander with a background in intelligence. He hires Helen McMurray to be the U.S. NVA's attorney, and she believes in him 100%.
No one loved this country more than he did. No one was a greater patriot. No one talked more about liberty and freedom and his appreciation for it than him.
The charity touts an 80-year history, but Thompson first files registration documents in the early 2000s, not long after showing up in Tampa, Florida.
When he first started off, there wasn't a whole lot of money coming in, and he was doing everything by himself. And it wasn't until he hired those professional fundraisers that things really seemed to take off.
The telemarketing firms Thompson hires will eventually help his charity bring in millions. They are allowed to pocket an astounding 85% of what they raise, and they don't ask many questions about Commander Thompson.
If you want to look at it with a jaundiced eye, so to speak, you could say they were being paid a lot of money to do what they were doing. They asked a question, they got an answer, the answer seemed legitimate, and they didn't dig any deeper.
As a former Ohio Assistant Attorney General, McMurray once went after charity cheats. Now she works for nonprofits and telemarketers, helping them to clear regulatory hurdles.
Bobby Thompson calls me up and he said that, these gosh darn regulators just keep trying to tell me what to do. He was the most passionate person I have ever heard talk about these issues on anything with anybody ever. I mean, when you're paying a lawyer hourly, you don't sit there and talk for hours and hours, and that's what he did.
McMurray says she's not the only one to hear the commander's self-serving, anti-regulatory message.
He regularly interacted with different important political people. The same message is that, we should be able to do what we want, whenever we want to do it, however we want to do it. That's our right.
As the U.S. NVA grows into a multi-million-dollar operation, Thompson becomes a big-time donor to politicians, most of them Republicans. The commander has his photo taken with presidential candidates John McCain and Rudolph Giuliani, Speaker of the House John Boehner, Presidential Advisor Karl Rove, and President George W. Bush. He's not afraid to share these pictures with others.
He was trying to show he was a big shot, that he had a lot of pull with people due to his position with the US NVA.
By 2009, tax returns say the U.S. Navy Veterans Association has brought in close to $100 million.
It was a money-making business. He had money coming in hand over fist. If he had not had that altercation with the reporter, he would have kept taking the money.
Next, journalists ask, who is the man behind this money-making organization?
There wasn't anything. He might as well have landed in Tampa on a spaceship from Mars.
In August 2009, investigative reporter Jeff Testerman is on his way to see Bobby Thompson about a donation he's made to a local politician in Tampa, Florida.
My expectation was that I would talk to this retired Navy guy, and I'd have a nice quote for the bottom of my story, about this county commissioner. It didn't go like that at all.
When Testerman gets to the commander's home, it hardly seems a fitting place for a retired Navy officer running a multi-million-dollar charity.
He was stuck in a hole across from a cigar factory with barbed wire around it. If you're looking to kind of keep a low profile, no better place.
Thompson has his apartment on one side of his duplex and the office from which he runs his charity on the other. His windows are covered with an odd mix of stickers. Inside, he scrawls bizarre messages on nailed-up boards. And in the kitchen, he's said to keep tequila by the caseful.
This guy was no dummy. And yet, the place he's living is a dump. He might have a little bit of a screw loose, He became openly hostile, aggressive. He basically threw me off his property.
Intrigued, Testerman returns to his office and discusses the strange encounter with the newspaper's head researcher, John Martin.
And I said, I just went over to see this guy, And this Lieutenant Commander Bobby Thompson was just all over me, like a vulture on roadkill. You know, what do you think?
They think it's time to dig deeper and begin by looking at the association's at times rambling website. Among 85 names they find connected to the charity, one sticks out, that of the association's listed CEO.
Jack Nimitz, this famous Navy name. Let's find him, you know, let's call him and find out what's going on. And Jack Nimitz was nowhere to be found.
Over the next few months, they continue searching and get similar results.
They were supposed to have a board of 12 people. They were supposed to have 85 officers in state chapters around the country. They were supposed to have 66,000 dues-paying members. We never found anything except Bobby Thompson.
But even information on Commander Thompson is elusive. He's like a man without a past.
The sort of background that real people like me, have. There wasn't anything. He might as well have landed in Tampa on a spaceship from Mars.
Testerman discovers that the purported Navy lieutenant commander has no military record. He's not the only one finding inconsistencies. At a breakfast meeting, attorney Helen McMurray asks Thompson about holes in his record, and he offers a surprising explanation.
The reason why he didn't have any current information on file was because he was actually working for the CIA, except it was black ops, and that this was a continuation of his military intelligence days and had to kind of remain somewhat invisible.
His lawyer doesn't know what to make of the early morning confession.
Considering he was finishing up his fourth Bloody Mary by the time he finished the story, I didn't really think much of it. But he'd had so many connections that worked out. It made a little bit of sense.
In their reporting, Testerman and Martin dig into these connections. They see that while Thompson lives in poverty, he has donated hundreds of thousands of dollars to various politicians. The reporters wonder what they've stumbled upon and come up with three theories. First, Thompson is a lone wolf on the run from the law who created the association in order to survive. Second, the professional fundraisers are really in charge, and Thompson works for them.
And the third theory is Thompson the tool of a pretty much right-wing group? I mean, sort of right of the Tea Party. We, to this day, I don't know which theory is actually the correct one.
Ohio Attorney General Mike DeWine received $1,000 from Thompson in 2006. He offers a simpler explanation for the con man's seemingly high-profile connections.
I'm sure the President of the United States had no idea who this guy was. It was probably at a fundraiser where he'd given some money. Both parties do that. It's not unusual. And it's just kind of the nature of, politics is you have to raise a lot of money.
In March 2010, after 7 months of investigating, the St. Petersburg Times publishes a series of articles about Thompson's Navy vet scam. Weeks later, a number of states across the country open investigations. Prying eyes are turning Thompson's criminal world upside down, threatening to expose the true story of his hidden past. Next on American Greed, a U.S. Marshal's worst nightmare, tracking an ex-intelligence officer who goes underground.
Every single lead that we uncovered just led to another false identity. This was somebody who was highly trained and highly experienced.
For years, Bobby Thompson has been running a fake veterans charity from this rundown duplex in Tampa, Florida. He's been aided by professional telemarketers who make millions by asking donors for money and asking the commander very little about the charity. Now, a series of articles has finally forced them to dig deeper. In June 2010, one telemarketer calls Thompson to Manhattan to give him the chance to prove there's more to the charity than just him.
The articles say there are no managers of this organization, there's no officers, there's no trustees. Okay, produce them.
Miraculously, Thompson brings 2 supposed board members with him. But there's a problem. They were appointed just days earlier.
These 2 purported new board members made everybody feel even worse than they were before. And so the next morning we got a communication from the attorney and they said, we're done. And I never heard from Bobby Thompson ever again.
Since starting the U.S. NBA, prosecutors say Thompson has siphoned off approximately $3 million meant for veterans. After the ill-fated meetings in New York, the commander begins hitting ATMs. Then he heads up the coast to Boston, Massachusetts. While trying to stay ahead of investigators, he hardly seems repentant.
After he went on the run, he started out trying to create new charities. He created an organization on paper called the Plymouth Rock Society, and he created an organization called Quakers Penn's Landing, both of them religious organizations.
In Ohio, donors handed over millions to Thompson's fake charity. And in October 2010, authorities there indict him on charges of racketeering, money laundering, and theft. But Thompson is nowhere to be found, and putting him in cuffs won't be easy.
Normally when we get a fugitive case, a police agency comes to us and says, go find this person. Well, in this case, they said, go find a person, we don't know who he is.
It turns out that the name Bobby Thompson is nothing more than a stolen identity. Bill Bolden leads a team of U.S. Marshals from Cleveland, Ohio, after they take on the hunt for the mystery man in late 2011. They begin their search with 3 stolen identities their fugitive has used: Bobby Thompson, Elmer Dozier, and Ronnie Britton. As they dig deeper, this list grows longer.
We would uncover an identity, and that would lead us to another identity. Then we'd try to investigate that identity, and it would overlap with another identity. We thought we were chasing Jason Bourne. The guy was a ghost.
Many of these identities were stolen from Native Americans living on the Navajo reservations of the Southwest. What's more, some were set up years before Thompson's crime came to light. Marshals realize they're not dealing with a regular fugitive.
Well, he was good at what he was doing. He knew how to cover his tracks. Obviously, he was trained, or he trained himself to be very good at hiding from the law.
Eventually, the search leads marshals to an apartment their fugitive has rented in Providence, Rhode Island. Though the commander has already skipped town, the team hunting him learns another name he's using: Anderson Yazzie.
There was only one Anderson Yazzie in the country. That identity was so unique that it was very, very easy for us to track.
Next on American Greed, investigators zero in and make a crucial discovery. In early 2012, a man with a limp shows up in Portland, Oregon, where he finds a room in Celia Moore's boarding house.
He told me his name was Kenneth Don Morissette. And he said, don't call me Ken. My mom called me Kenny when I was growing up, and I don't like it. Just call me Don.
Morissette claims to be a retired cop and a consultant for the Boeing Company. Often working on a computer in his room, Moore says he was an ideal tenant, as long as she avoided one topic of conversation.
Well, his politics were very, very far right-wing, and he said he was a creationist and just very far right.
Morissette lives quite frugally, taking some meals at a homeless shelter and existing on Pepsi, string cheese, burritos, and ramen noodles.
It's an amazing amount of lunches, like a man who was going to stay for a while. I thought he was staying a while.
Outside the house, Morissette spends time visiting a rented storage locker.
Well, he mentioned that he'd been married for 35 years and that it was a very ugly divorce and that he didn't want his wife to know where he was. That if she found him, she would take his money away. Now I realize that he was worried that the U.S. government would find him, not his wife.
Not far from Moore's home, Morissette makes credit card purchases under a name that U.S. Marshals have keyed in on: Anderson Yazzie. On the night of April 30th, 2012, it's been 2 years since reporters exposed Commander Bobby Thompson's Veterans Charity as a scam. That night, he sits down at Biddy McGraw's Irish Pub on Portland's northeast side. Sitting next to him is someone who has just arrived in town. It's one of the men tracking the scam artist, Deputy U.S. Marshal Bill Bolden. Hoping to find clues inside their fugitive's home, they wait and follow him, slowly.
We were not going to arrest him right away. We wanted to find out, number one, who he really was, and we were looking for what we were calling the Bank of Bobby Thompson.
As he approaches his front door at 10:30 p.m., marshals cuff him. They finally caught the man who reeled in millions claiming to help those in uniform. But who is he?
We asked him his name. Sir, what is your name? His response was, I invoke my Fifth Amendment rights. I'm not going to tell you my name.
Though their shadowy figure is tight-lipped, he's carrying 3 separate wallets, each containing a fully fleshed-out identity. In one, they find a business card for a storage facility with a unit number written on it. The marshals head there, not sure of what they'll find. Inside, they see 2 suitcases.
It's just stacks of birth certificates.
One contains a virtual workshop of fake ID materials.
And these things is 94.
Do they match any of our names?
Yazzie Anderson, Arthur Barillo, Kenneth Morissette. Whoa! God!
And inside the second bag?
Oh, my God. Oh, hundreds. These are hundreds. How much? It's the motherlode. This is, we joked. We said, hopefully this storage unit is the Bank of Bobby Thompson, and this is it. We're talking, these are mostly hundreds. 50s, hundreds. There's obviously a lot of 20s as well, but this is more money than I've ever seen in one spot.
The team takes the loot to a secure location, running it through cash counters, anxiously waiting for a final tally.
2,800.
28.
Yeah.
981, 650.
Just under a mil.
It's a huge haul, but it's just a fraction of the millions that prosecutors will later say the commander pocketed. Across town, landlord Celia Moore makes one more interesting discovery in her tenant's rented room: a DVD of the film Catch Me If You Can.
He thought he was like the guy in the movie, and nobody was ever going to catch him, and he was going to keep going and doing what he was doing. Because with $1 million, he could have disappeared across the border the next day. But instead, he was staying and doing it all over again.
The marshals prove they can catch their man. But when they lock him up in Ohio, where he's facing state charges related to the USNVA scam, he still refuses to say who he is and signs his name with an X. Pete Elliott, U.S. Marshal for the Northern District of Ohio, isn't too concerned.
I thought for sure we were going to find out his true identity once we put his fingerprints in the national system.
But it's not that easy. When they search for fingerprint matches, nothing comes up in the U.S., Canada, or through Interpol.
I've been in law enforcement 30 years, and I've never seen that before. We had no clue who Mr. X was.
For 5 months, Mr. X sits in a cell, leaving Elliott and others wondering who he is.
I always felt that Bobby Thompson was probably somebody that did a similar crime in the past, but was never arrested for it, because if he's arrested, his fingerprints would have been in our national system.
To check this theory, in September 2012, Elliott fires up his computer.
I started Googling missing Navy vets, most wanted military fugitives, and also most wanted fraud fugitives.
What he finds is a story that would be unbelievable were it not true. Next on American Greed, his past catches up to him, Mr. X's true identity revealed.
He just was strange, and it only got stranger as the conversation went on.
When Marshal Pete Elliott starts searching for the true identity of Mr. X, he has no idea that the story of the Navy Vets charity scam is about to become even more bizarre. Among the results he finds is a wanted poster for a fraud fugitive from the 1980s named John Donald Cody.
So the first thing that popped out to me was a picture on the far left-hand side of John Donald Cody from 1980, and he had a pompadour hairstyle. And Bobby Thompson from 1990s and 2000s, he has a pompadour hairstyle.
Elliott notes other similarities between the man on the wanted poster, Cody, and the man in custody, Thompson. The fugitive, Cody, has no tear glands. Thompson leaves bottles of eye drops in his room in Portland. Cody is a former Army intelligence captain. Thompson claims to be a Navy intelligence lieutenant commander. Cody has a Harvard Law degree. Thompson is taking an active role defending himself in the Navy veterans case.
Give us a breakdown, Mr. Britton, of what you were doing in 1997.
So all these things started adding up, but nothing's exact. I could be as right as I could be wrong.
To prove that the man arrested for stealing millions is actually John Donald Cody, Elliott needs his fingerprints. When he calls an FBI agent working Cody's old case, he learns that the Bureau has a set of his prints that were never entered into the national database.
I don't know why they were not in the national system. The bottom line is, if they were in the national system, then we wouldn't have spent 5 months trying to identify who he really was.
When Elliott receives a copy, he has them triple-checked against Mr. X's prints. Then he pays the Navy vet scammer a visit in his cell.
I go, "We uncovered who you are, John Donald Cody," and he just looked at me with a smile on his face, and that was it.
Elliott has figured out the mystery man's true identity. But how Captain Cody became Commander Thompson is a story that still leaves him guessing. While many of his classmates protested the Vietnam War, John Donald Cody followed the call of duty. When he graduated from Harvard Law School in 1972, Cody was a reserve Army officer with a specialty in military intelligence and a top-secret clearance.
He was intelligent. He had all the opportunity you could want. It seemed like everything would have been on the up and up for him.
Cody's military records show him working civilian jobs at a variety of top-notch law firms in the early 1970s. They also include an offer letter from 1974 for a job with an obscure Defense Department office in Washington, D.C. Cody and a person once listed publicly as an employee of the office say it was a cover for CIA agents. Cody will later say he worked for the agency starting in 1972. The CIA declined to comment on his claim.
Whether he ever had any contact with the CIA, I have no clue. There's just no way for us to know that.
In 1977, Cody's records say he's in the Philippines attending graduate school. In 1979, the year he leaves, his employer is listed as U.S. government duties classified. That same year, he returns to the U.S. and sets up his own law firm in an unlikely place, Sierra Vista, Arizona. It's a dusty town along the Mexican border and is home to an Army intelligence base where Cody once trained. In Sierra Vista, he befriends Terry Cerizo, who gets to know him as a fiercely liberal Democrat.
He had a picture of Bobby Kennedy on the wall behind his chair in his office. He wanted equality for people, and he was willing to fight for it.
One of Cody's secretaries, Diane Shaughnessy, says this philosophy carries over to the way he treats his clients, many of them indigents.
Everybody was important. One was not better than the other, and he fought hard for everybody.
Representing clients in both criminal and civil matters, Cody racks up many courtroom victories. While Cody has his law office, as a reservist, records say he also does part-time legal duty at the intelligence base in town. Performance reviews from 1980 call him a superior officer with a high degree of integrity. This is a far cry from the Cody that former prosecutor Dennis Lusk knows around the same time.
Honesty meant nothing to him. Ethics meant nothing to him. Candor to the court meant nothing to him if it meant getting ahead with his clients.
Here at the Bisbee courthouse, Lusk prosecutes many of Cody's clients. He says Cody viewed him and other prosecutors through a distorted lens.
No matter how routine the case was, it was the worst case of prosecutorial misconduct and overstepping, and we were trying to stomp him under the Nazi boot. And that was a term he used fairly frequently over the course of time that I knew him.
In legal filings on behalf of his clients, Cody seems at times unhinged. Signed with a strange scrawl, he references Adolf Hitler and compares Lusk to a KGB agent.
As time went on, he seemed more and more radical, almost to the point of being an anarchist.
Cody lives at this simple apartment complex, and over the years, friends notice he's growing increasingly paranoid. In 1981, he tells a reporter he fears prosecutors may be trying to kill him.
Did he have personality disorder? I don't know.
In late May 1984, Cody meets Cereso at the Sari Gulch Saloon and tells her he's involved in a secret mission.
There were a lot of drugs coming in across the border. He felt there were official people who were perpetuating it, and he wanted to bring them down. But he said, if I can't accomplish this, I will have to disappear.
On May 21st, 1984, Cody says he's leaving town on unexpected business.
I had no idea that this would be the last day that I would ever see or hear from him.
I was perplexed. I thought John was trying to do something good, and it went bad.
But in the days to come, another story will come out. At the Bisbee courthouse, Cody has been held in contempt after he allegedly lied to a judge. He has skipped town with nearly $100,000 stolen from his clients and left his Corvette at the Phoenix airport, unlocked, with the keys in the ignition. In 1987, Cody is indicted on federal fraud charges related to the theft from his clients in Arizona. The FBI poster that Pete Elliott will eventually find says Cody is also wanted for questioning in an espionage investigation. The FBI tells American Greed that national security precludes them from talking about Cody's case. So what made Cody run? Prosecutors in Ohio say his advancement in the Army Reserves was not going as he might have hoped. But a definitive cause remains elusive.
There's nothing in his military records that indicates anything right off the bat that would say, this happened and therefore he's gone. And that's the big question mark.
It's not the only one. After leaving Arizona in 1984, Cody remains underground until he emerges in Florida in 1998 as the highly connected commander, Bobby Thompson.
There's a big block of time where no one has been able to determine what Thompson was doing in that 15-year period.
How did he feel so comfortable walking into the White House while he is an FBI wanted fugitive? I still think there's a lot about John Donald Cody that we just do not know.
Next on American Greed, from his jail cell, Cody offers up an intriguing explanation for his Navy vet's crime.
Oh, how did I drop into a Tom Clancy novel? I mean, that's what came to my mind.
As John Donald Cody heads to trial for running the Navy vets charity scam, he digs into his past as a Harvard-trained lawyer, filing scores of handwritten motions. In these, he says that he worked for the CIA beginning in the 1970s. that the agency subjected him to hypnosis and psychotropic drug treatment, and even claims that until 2012, he was working for them as a non-official cover officer.
We can't say whether he was a CIA agent or whether he never was a CIA agent. According to the records, he was a lawyer, and that's what he was. That's what the records say.
While running his fake charity, Cody donated hundreds of thousands of dollars to politicians. He claims the U.S. Navy Veterans Association was not a criminal enterprise, but a U.S. intelligence community, White House, and Republican Party manipulated operation.
I was taking orders. Higher-ups were telling me that to do this, and I was, following orders and this sort of thing. He put that out there.
Attorney Helen McMurray remembers that breakfast meeting when Cody downed multiple Bloody Marys and told her the association was tied to the CIA. She still wonders if his story is one she can dismiss 100%.
I can't. And quite frankly, the fact that when they arrested him and his fingerprints did not turn up in any database, it really makes you question.
But prosecutors see it another way.
It sort of goes against what would be in the, I would guess, the Spy 101 manual to say, I'm a super secret spy, but by the way, here's a picture of me shaking hands with the President of the United States.
What's more, they say Cody's cloak and dagger justification for running his fake charity is a moot point.
Even if he would have been the James Bond of Ohio, there's no exemptions that allow a federal officer of any kind to come into the state of Ohio or any other state and break state laws at their own will or at the command of someone else.
In September 2013, Thompson's Navy Vets charity fraud trial gets underway here at the Cuyahoga County Courthouse in Cleveland, Ohio. In his opening statement, Cody's attorney, Joseph Patitus, hints at a defense involving Cody's claimed CIA career.
You're going to have to ask yourself, how does he get that close to the President of the United States?
The prosecution presents its case first and calls 42 witnesses. As they finish, things turn strange. Those in the courtroom hear the defendant in a nearby holding cell banging his head against a wall. Days later, he shows up looking disheveled.
The magnitude of the evidence that was presented against him was coming home. It was a ploy for a mistrial, again to try to manipulate the system.
After months of hinting at a defense involving his claimed CIA career, Cody refuses to testify, and his lawyer calls no witnesses in his defense.
I think he didn't have any defense. There was nothing that he really could say. Once you take the stand, you open yourself up for all kinds of cross-examination.
The jury needs only 3 hours before they find Cody guilty of racketeering, theft, money laundering, and identity fraud charges. 1 month later, Judge Stephen Gall sentences him to 28 years in prison. He also orders the one-time Army captain to spend every Veterans Day in solitary confinement. Now, Cody sits here at an Ohio prison, where he could spend the rest of his life. To this day, many are left with questions about Cody's past, about his ability to hide in plain sight, and about his reason for stealing millions while living a life of poverty.
The game was what it was all about to him. The ability to walk into the White House with a fake ID, knowing that he was already a fugitive when he did that.
One thing about John Donald Cody, he always has to be the smartest guy in the room, no matter what room he is in.
He may have been the smartest person in the room most of the time, but somewhere along the line, he got twisted, he got turned, and just dropped off the deep end. And when he dropped off the deep end, he went full bore.
This story went from a dilapidated, rundown duplex, and it went all the way to the White House. What's going on here? I still don't know the answer.
In Portland, marshals found close to $1 million. But it's only a fraction of the $100 million Thompson/Cody said he raised for veterans. What happened to the rest?
A lot of this money really hasn't been accounted for. And I don't know if anybody knows, aside from Thompson, where it went.
Do I think there's other storage units out there? If I was a betting man, I would say I think there probably is.
January 25, 2025, Indianapolis, Indiana. The temperature outside hovered just above freezing as patrol cars pulled into the parking lot of Timber Point Apartments. Neighbors peered through their blinds, watching officers respond to what initially seemed like a routine call, a mother reporting her 2-year-old daughter missing. Officer James Mendez would later tell reporters that nothing in his 15 years of service could have prepared him for what awaited inside apartment 4B. When we entered, the cold hit us first, Mendez recalled. Inside that apartment, the temperature gauge read between 46 and 51 degrees, no heat in the middle of winter. But it was the smell that stopped us in our tracks. What those officers discovered wasn't a missing child case at all. It was something far worse. The body of 2-year-old Skylar Gardner lay motionless beneath a fallen dresser, her tiny frame already cold to the touch. Her hands and feet showed signs of frostbite. Multiple bruises marked her small body. A puncture wound near her neck told its own horrific story. But perhaps most disturbing was the state of the apartment itself. A prison of filth where young Skylar and her 3-year-old brother had been left to fend for themselves. Garbage piled in corners, human waste smeared on walls and floors, empty food containers scattered throughout. This wasn't the aftermath of a sudden tragedy. This was systematic neglect that had been ongoing for months. Yet the woman who led officers to this scene of horror, 33-year-old Chantel Gardner, was known to many in the Indianapolis music community. By night, she performed at local venues, guitar in hand, voice captivating audiences who knew nothing of what took place behind closed doors. Social media accounts showcased a talented musician with a growing following. Photos captured her smiling on stage, seemingly without a care in the world. But where was Chantel during the long winter nights when her children shivered alone in that freezing apartment? According to investigators, she was warming herself in the bed of her 39-year-old boyfriend, Brian Thomas. This isn't just a story about neglect. It's about choices. About a mother who repeatedly chose her romantic relationship over the basic needs of her defenseless children. It's about how, for months, Skylar and her brother existed in a parallel universe to their mother's public life. One filled with darkness, cold, and profound abandonment. How does a mother walk away from her babies? Asked Detective Sarah Williams during a press conference following Gardner's arrest. How does anyone leave a toddler alone for days, knowing there's no food, no heat, no supervision? Those questions would haunt investigators as they pieced together the timeline of events that led to Skylar's death. What began as brief absences in October 2024, a quick trip to the store, an hour at Thomas's apartment, gradually extended into overnight stays. Eventually, according to witness statements, Chantel would disappear for days at a time, leaving her 2-year-old daughter and 3-year-old son completely alone. The children had no way to call for help, prosecutor Michael Reynolds stated. They couldn't reach door handles to escape. They couldn't feed themselves properly or stay warm. They were trapped in conditions no human being should endure, let alone a toddler. When officers interviewed Chantel after discovering Skylar's body, her story changed repeatedly. First, she claimed she'd been home all day and found Skylar unresponsive while preparing dinner. Then she admitted leaving the children alone, just for a couple of hours, to visit Thomas. Finally, after hours of questioning, the truth emerged. She hadn't been home for 3 days. If you've ever wondered how someone could abandon their own child, this story will shake you to your core. Hit subscribe and join our community as we explore the darkest corners of human behavior. What state or country are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below. Tonight, we examine how a seemingly normal mother transformed into someone capable of leaving her children in conditions that would ultimately claim her daughter's life. The case of Chantel Gardner isn't just disturbing. It forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature and our responsibility to protect the most vulnerable among us. Chantel Marie Gardner, 33, was born in Gary, Indiana, to a single mother who struggled with addiction. Court records reveal a childhood marked by instability. She attended 7 different schools before dropping out at 16. By 20, she had accumulated a record of minor offenses, shoplifting, possession, and disorderly conduct. At 25, she gave birth to her son, followed by Skylar 2 years later. Both children had different fathers, neither of whom remained in the picture. Those who knew Gardner described her as someone who could never quite get ahead. She moved to Indianapolis in 2022, hoping for a fresh start. For a while it seemed she might succeed. She secured an apartment at Timber Point, found work as a bartender, and appeared to be creating stability for her children. But beneath the surface, Gardner battled demons from her past. Unresolved trauma that would eventually consume not only her life, but the life of her youngest child. Music became Gardner's escape from her troubled reality. She performed at small venues across Indianapolis under the stage name Channy B, developing a modest following in the local underground scene. Her raw, emotionally charged performances resonated with audiences who connected with lyrics about struggle and resilience. She had this haunting quality to her voice, recalled Marcus Wilson, owner of The Basement, a popular music venue where Gardner performed regularly. When she sang, people listened. There was authentic pain there. You couldn't fake that kind of emotion. Gardner's social media accounts painted the picture of an aspiring artist on the verge of breakthrough. She posted videos of performances, studio sessions, and promotional content for upcoming shows. These carefully curated glimpses into her musical life stood in stark contrast to her home environment. While she projected the image of a dedicated artist pursuing her passion, her apartment deteriorated into squalor, and her children suffered increasing neglect. The disparity between her public persona and private reality would later shock those who thought they knew her. Before Brian Thomas entered her life, Gardner maintained what neighbors described as a functional relationship with her children. She wasn't winning Mother of the Year awards, but she met their basic needs. Daycare workers reported that both children arrived clean, adequately dressed, and with packed lunches most days. "She seemed to be trying," said Letitia Johnson, who lived in the apartment next door. "I'd see her taking them to the playground on weekends. The little girl Skylar was always holding her hand and smiling." Gardner's social media occasionally featured photos of her children, birthday celebrations, trips to the park, ordinary moments of family life. These glimpses suggested a mother who, despite her struggles, found joy in her children. What changed this dynamic would prove devastating for everyone involved, especially for little Skylar. Gardner met Brian Thomas, 39, at one of her performances in August 2024. Their relationship intensified rapidly, consuming her attention and time. Within weeks, Thomas became a fixture in her life, though notably absent from her apartment. "She started leaving the kids with anyone who would take them," Johnson recalled. "She'd knock on my door at 10 p.m. asking if I could watch them just for an hour. She'd come back the next morning." As fall progressed, Gardner's appearances at her children's daycare became erratic. Staff noted increasing absences, late pickups, and concerning changes in the children's appearance. The apartment began to deteriorate as Gardner spent more nights at Thomas's residence across town. By November, neighbors reported hearing the children crying through the night, sometimes for hours. Gardner's performances became less frequent, yet she was rarely home. a troubling paradox that signaled her priorities had shifted dramatically. "I should have called someone," lamented Darnell Washington, the building's maintenance supervisor. "I went in to fix her leaking sink in December and couldn't believe what I was seeing. Garbage everywhere, dirty diapers piled up, barely any food in the fridge. The little boy was trying to feed his sister cereal straight from the box. I told her she needed to clean up or face eviction, but I never followed through. I keep thinking about that now." Co-workers at the Rusty Nail, where Gardner tended bar part-time, noticed changes too. "She started missing shifts, showing up disheveled," said manager Kimberly Reeves. "When I asked about her kids, she'd get defensive, say they were fine, and change the subject. The last time I saw her, about 2 weeks before everything happened, she was borrowing money from everyone. She seemed desperate, not like herself at all." A former friend who requested anonymity provided the most damning account. "I stopped by unannounced in early January. The kids were alone. The apartment was freezing. Skylar had what looked like bite marks on her arms. When I confronted Chantel later, she blocked my number. I wish I'd called the police right then." What began as brief absences, "I'll be back in an hour," stretched into elastic time frames with no definite end. Neighbors recalled seeing Gardner leave on Friday evenings, keys jangling in hand, promising the children she'd return soon. Soon became Saturday afternoon, then Sunday evening, sometimes extending into Monday. The children learned to measure time not by clocks, but by hunger pangs and dwindling food supply. By spring, Gardner's disappearances had evolved into a predictable pattern of abandonment. She would receive a text, her face illuminating with anticipation, and within minutes she would be gone. Sometimes for hours, sometimes for days. The apartment door would close behind her with a decisive click, leaving the children to wonder when they might see her again. The apartment's deterioration mirrored Gardner's increasing neglect. Once white walls yellowed with grime and crayon marks that no one bothered to clean. The kitchen sink overflowed with crusty dishes, attracting small insects that eventually became permanent residents. Food remnants hardened on countertops and tables, creating a sticky film that covered every surface. The refrigerator contained a rotating collection of half-empty condiment bottles, expired milk, and occasionally a few eggs. Never enough to properly feed 2 growing children. Garbage bags piled by the door when Gardner wasn't present to take them out, their contents spilling onto the hallway carpet, emitting odors that neighbors would later describe as concerning but not quite alarming enough to prompt intervention. Gardner's social media transformed into a carefully curated showcase of her relationship, photos of romantic dinners and weekend getaways, conspicuously absent of any mention of her children. Friends later reported that Gardner spoke of Thomas with reverence, describing him as the love I've been waiting for, and someone who finally puts me first. When questioned about her children during these outings, Gardner would offer vague assurances they're fine or they're old enough to manage. She began referring to Skylar as my little adult, a phrase that would later haunt investigators as they pieced together the extent of responsibilities placed on the child's small shoulders. Child psychologists consulted during the investigation explained how neglect typically follows a gradual trajectory. The parent begins with small absences, testing boundaries, noted Dr. Eleanor Simmons in her case assessment. When no immediate consequences occur, these absences extend, creating a pattern of abandonment that becomes normalized. For Gardner, each successful departure reinforced the belief that her children could survive without her. Each time she returned to find them alive, hungry and disheveled but alive. It validated her choices. The children's ability to endure became perversely permission to leave them again. School officials noted Skylar's increasing absences and declining academic performance, but attributed these changes to typical family stress. Neighbors heard occasional crying but hesitated to interfere in what they considered private family matters. The building manager noticed rent payments becoming increasingly late, but never inspected the deteriorating conditions inside. Each potential intervention point became instead another missed opportunity, another link in the chain of collective inaction that would eventually lead to tragedy. January 25, 2025 began as an unremarkable Saturday, cold and overcast with snow flurries dusting the city. At 2:17 p.m., the emergency dispatch center received a call from Chantel Gardner, her voice pitched high with what dispatchers would later describe as performative panic. "My daughter is missing," Gardner reported, her words tumbling over each other. "I can't find Skylar anywhere. I've looked everywhere." When asked when she had last seen her daughter, Gardner hesitated before answering. "This morning? Maybe around 9. The dispatcher noted the uncertainty in her voice. What Gardner failed to mention was that she had actually been away from the apartment for nearly 3 days, returning only when Thomas had ended their latest encounter. She had spent those days in a motel across town, her phone deliberately switched off. A detail phone records would later confirm. Officers Ramirez and Chen were dispatched to the address, arriving at 2:43 p.m. Gardner met them outside the apartment building, still wearing her coat, as if reluctant to invite them inside. She might have gone to a friend's house, Gardner suggested, unable to provide names of any friends Skylar might have visited. But she knows she's supposed to leave a note. When officers finally entered apartment 4B, they were immediately struck by two things: the biting cold and the overwhelming stench. Officer Ramirez would later testify that the temperature inside felt as cold as outdoors, noting that his breath formed visible clouds as he spoke. The heating had been shut off for non-payment weeks earlier, leaving the apartment exposed to January temperatures that had dipped below freezing for several consecutive nights. The smell, a noxious combination of rotting food, human waste, and something deeper and more concerning, caused Officer Chin to momentarily step back into the hallway. In 15 years on the force, she would later state, "I've never encountered living conditions this severe in a home with children." The officers' body cameras captured the scene in unforgiving detail. Piles of garbage reaching waist height in corners, dishes crusted with mold, dark stains spreading across the carpet, windows sealed with plastic sheets that did little to keep out the cold. "Where's your sister?" Officer Ramirez asked Chantel Gardner's son. "Skylar's sleeping," he answered, pointing toward a closed door at the end of the hallway. The children's bedroom revealed conditions even more appalling than the main living area. Human feces were smeared across one wall, where the youngest child had apparently given up trying to reach the bathroom. Dirty clothes formed mountains in each corner. A single mattress lay on the floor, its covering long since soiled beyond recognition. And there, partially obscured by a fallen dresser, lay Skylar. Officer Chen's body camera captured the moment of discovery, her sharp intake of breath followed by the urgent radio call. "We need medical, now. Child down, unresponsive." But even as paramedics were dispatched, both officers recognized what they were seeing. Skylar Gardner, 2 years old, had been dead for hours, possibly days. Those new court documents say 2-year-old Skylar Gardner may have been dead for several hours before she was found, and her body was full of bruises and injuries. Tragic to think about the victim here. A young victim who family says has such a bright smile, impersonality, and unfortunately that flame was put out too soon. Saturday night, police say Skylar's mother called them after she found Skylar unresponsive under a dresser. Court documents say once officers got inside the apartment, they found trash, human feces, steak knives, and soiled items scattered around. When Skylar was taken to the hospital, doctors found a large puncture wound to her neck. This life deserved to have a fulfilled. who knows how old, and lived a wonderful life, brought brightness into everyone's lives. Documents reveal when Skylar's mother and her boyfriend talked with police, they both said she would spend the night at her place every night, leaving Skylar and her older brother alone in the apartment. The mother also said she would only check on the two once a day, only to bring them food and a drink, and they would be dirty. The mother denied abusing the children. It said she knew she was neglecting them. But we're the only ones in the society, adults, that can be the advocate for these children, to have a voice. IMPD says in cases like this, it's important for other family members to be aware of any abuse or neglect and report it immediately. Please reach out to 911, contact the police, we will get you resources. It's not criminal to ask for help, and we want you to do so. So another child doesn't lose their life to neglect. In Indianapolis, Anna Trocker, 13 News. Her small body was cold to the touch, her lips and fingertips tinged blue. Rigor mortis had already set in. The medical examiner would later determine her body temperature at 52 degrees Fahrenheit, far below what any living person could sustain. Frostbite had marked her extremities, turning her fingers and toes a mottled purple-black. The fallen dresser told part of the story. Investigators determined that Skylar had likely been attempting to reach something on top of the six-drawer chest, perhaps food or warm clothing. The dresser, unstable on the uneven floor and missing its safety anchors, had toppled forward, pinning her underneath its weight. But the dresser alone didn't explain everything. The autopsy would reveal multiple injuries in various stages of healing, bruises on her arms and torso, a partially healed fracture in her left wrist, signs of chronic malnutrition with a body weight 30% below normal for her age. Her stomach was empty, suggesting she hadn't eaten for at least 24 hours before death. Most damning was the evidence that Skylar had been alive for some time after the dresser fell. Scratch marks on the floor indicated she had tried to pull herself free. The position of her body suggested she had managed to partially extract herself before succumbing to a combination of injuries, hypothermia, and exhaustion. The medical examiner estimated that Skylar had been trapped for 8 to 12 hours before death. The cause of death, the medical examiner would later testify, was multiple system failure due to hypothermia, compounded by blunt force trauma and chronic malnutrition. In layman's terms, she froze to death, weakened by injury and hunger, with no one coming to her aid. As officers led Gardner away in handcuffs, neighbors gathered in the hallway, their expressions a mixture of shock and guilt. "We heard crying sometimes," one woman admitted, "but we never thought." Her voice trailed off, the unfinished sentence hanging in the air like an indictment. This story's difficult to hear, but it's important we don't turn away from these realities. If you're finding value in this investigation, please take a moment to like this video and share it with others. Have you ever witnessed concerning behavior toward children in your community? What did you do? From the moment police arrived at the Timber Point apartments, Chantel Gardner's statements raised red flags. Initially, she claimed that Skylar had gone missing while she was preparing dinner. She described searching the apartment frantically before calling 911. However, inconsistencies in her story quickly emerged. During her first interview at the station, Gardner admitted she had left the children alone earlier that day to visit Brian Thomas. She claimed she had only been gone for a few hours and returned to find Skylar unresponsive. When pressed further, her timeline began to shift. In a later interview, she confessed to leaving the children alone overnight, stating she had been overwhelmed and needed a break. Investigators noted that her demeanor alternated between defensive and detached, with little visible emotion when discussing her daughter's death. As the interviews continued, Gardner's story unraveled further. She eventually admitted that she had been leaving her children alone regularly since October 2024, sometimes for days at a time. Her explanations ranged from blaming financial stress to claiming she believed her children were old enough to manage on their own. These shifting narratives only deepened investigators' suspicions and painted a grim picture of prolonged neglect. Investigators worked tirelessly to piece together the timeline of events leading up to Skylar's death. Witness statements from neighbors, daycare staff, and acquaintances painted a clear picture of escalating neglect. Records showed that Gardner had stopped bringing her children to daycare in late October 2024, around the same time she began spending more time with Brian Thomas. Phone records and interviews revealed that Gardner often left her children alone for extended periods, sometimes staying at Thomas's residence for multiple nights. Surveillance footage from the apartment complex confirmed that Gardner had not returned home for at least 24 hours before Skylar's body was discovered. Through interviews with Thomas, investigators learned that Gardner had confided in him about her struggles with parenting. However, Thomas denied ever visiting the apartment or witnessing the conditions firsthand. His claims were met with skepticism, as text messages between the two reveal that he was aware of Gardner's absences and the children being left alone. This evidence solidified the timeline of neglect, showing a pattern of abandonment that spanned months. The conditions inside the apartment provided investigators with a grim backdrop to Skylar's death. Crime scene photos documented piles of garbage, rotting food, and human waste scattered across the floors. The apartment's heating system was broken, leaving the interior dangerously cold during the harsh January weather. Investigators noted that the children's clothing and bedding were insufficient to protect them from the freezing temperatures. The fallen dresser, under which Skylar's body was found, became a focal point of the investigation. Forensic analysis revealed that the dresser had been unstable for months, with missing screws and a broken base. Skylar's injuries, including bruises, bite marks, frostbite, and a puncture wound near her neck, suggested prolonged suffering. The autopsy confirmed that Skylar had died from a combination of blunt force trauma and hypothermia, with the dresser's collapse being the final fatal event. Investigators also found minimal food in the apartment, with most of it spoiled or inaccessible to the children. The refrigerator contained only a carton of expired milk and a few moldy leftovers. These findings corroborated witness accounts of neglect and painted a harrowing picture of the children's living conditions in the weeks leading up to the tragedy. Experts in child welfare were brought in to provide insight into the devastating effects of such living conditions on young children. Dr. Emily Carter, a pediatrician specializing in child neglect cases, explained that prolonged exposure to extreme cold, malnutrition, and unsanitary environments can have catastrophic consequences on a child's physical and emotional development. Children as young as Skylar are incredibly vulnerable, Dr. Carter stated. Living in an environment without adequate food, warmth, or hygiene weakens their immune systems, making them more susceptible to illness and infection. The frostbite on Skylar's hands and feet indicates prolonged exposure to freezing temperatures, which would have caused immense pain and suffering. Dr. Carter also highlighted the psychological toll of neglect. At 2 years old, children rely entirely on their caregivers for safety and comfort. Being left alone for extended periods would have caused severe emotional distress, fear, and confusion. The bite marks on Skylar's body may even suggest self-soothing behaviors or attempts by her older brother to comfort her in the absence of adult care. This expert testimony underscored the severity of the neglect and the unimaginable suffering Skylar endured in her final days. Following the discovery of Skylar's body and the evidence collected, both Chantel Gardner and Brian Thomas were arrested. Gardner faced multiple charges including murder, neglect of a dependent resulting in serious bodily injury, and child endangerment. Prosecutors argued that her repeated absences and failure to provide basic necessities directly led to Skylar's death. Brian Thomas, while not present at the apartment, was charged with assisting a criminal and obstruction of justice, investigators found text messages in which Thomas encouraged Gardner to lie to the police about her whereabouts and downplay the conditions of the apartment. Prosecutors alleged that Thomas's actions enabled Gardner's neglect by providing her with an escape from her responsibilities. The legal proceedings began shortly after their arrests. During Gardner's initial court appearance, prosecutors emphasized the egregious nature of her neglect, describing it as a pattern of abandonment that culminated in Skylar's death. Gardner's defense attorney argued that she was overwhelmed by financial and emotional stress, attempting to shift some of the blame onto systemic failures in child welfare services. However, the prosecution countered that Gardner had ample opportunities to seek help, but instead chose to prioritize her relationship with Thomas. Brian Thomas's defense team maintained that he had no direct involvement in the children's care and was unaware of the full extent of the neglect. However, prosecutors presented text messages and phone records as evidence of his complicity, arguing that his actions or lack thereof contributed to the tragedy. Both Gardner and Thomas were denied bail and their cases were set for trial. The Marion County Prosecutor's Office vowed to seek the maximum penalties, stating, "This case represents one of the most heartbreaking examples of neglect we've seen. We are committed to ensuring justice for Skylar and her surviving sibling." The legal process would stretch on for months, with the community closely following every development. For many, the case became a rallying cry for greater accountability in child welfare and a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of neglect. The news of Skylar Gardner's death sent shockwaves through the Indianapolis community. Residents of the Timber Point apartments, many of whom had seen the children playing outside or heard their cries through the thin walls, were devastated. For some, the tragedy brought feelings of guilt and regret for not intervening sooner. "I can't stop thinking about it," said Letitia Johnson, a neighbor who had occasionally babysat the children. "I should have done more. I heard them crying some nights, but I thought it wasn't my place to get involved. Now I wish I had called someone." The broader Indianapolis community was equally horrified. Social media platforms were flooded with posts expressing outrage and sorrow. Many questioned how such severe neglect could go unnoticed for so long, while others called for stricter oversight of child welfare cases. The story quickly gained traction in local news, with headlines describing the appalling conditions of the apartment and the heartbreaking details of Skylar's final moments. Local residents organized vigils and online discussions, determined to ensure that Skylar's death would not be forgotten. The tragedy became a rallying point for conversations about child neglect and the responsibility of communities to protect vulnerable children. Community leaders and child welfare advocates spoke out, urging action to prevent similar tragedies. Reverend Michael Harris, a prominent figure in the Indianapolis faith community, addressed the issue during a Sunday sermon. "Skylar's death is a failure on all of our parts," he said. "We must do better as neighbors, as friends, and as a society to protect our children. If you see something, say something. Don't wait." Child welfare organizations also weighed in, emphasizing the importance of reporting suspected neglect. "This case is a stark reminder of how quickly neglect can escalate into tragedy," said Angela Martinez, director of the Indiana Child Advocacy Network. "We need to empower communities to recognize the signs of neglect and provide resources for struggling families before it's too late." Local officials, including the mayor of Indianapolis, pledged to review existing child welfare policies. "We cannot allow another child to fall through the cracks," the mayor stated during a press conference. Skylar's story is heartbreaking, but it must serve as a wake-up call for all of us. In the weeks following Skylar's death, the community came together to honor her memory. A candlelight vigil was held outside the Timber Point apartments, where dozens of residents gathered to mourn the loss of a life cut tragically short. Attendees left flowers, stuffed animals, and handwritten notes at a makeshift memorial near the apartment building's entrance. One note read, "Rest in peace, sweet Skylar. You deserved so much more." Local organizations also launched initiatives aimed at raising awareness about child neglect. A nonprofit group organized a fundraiser to support Skylar's surviving sibling, who had been placed in foster care. The funds were used to provide clothing, toys, and therapy for the young boy, as well as to support other children in similar situations. Schools in the area began hosting workshops for parents and teachers on recognizing signs of neglect and abuse. These efforts were part of a broader push to ensure that Skylar's death would not be in vain. For many in the community, the tragedy sparked a mix of grief and anger. Parents questioned how a mother could abandon her children in such conditions, while others pointed to systemic failures that allowed the neglect to continue unchecked. Online forums and local news comment sections were filled with debates about accountability, with some blaming Gardner entirely and others criticizing the lack of intervention from child welfare services. Therapists and grief counselors in the area reported an increase in families seeking support, particularly those who had been directly affected by the case. "This tragedy has left a deep scar on our community," said Dr. Rachel Mitchenkin, a licensed counselor who worked with several families in the area. "People are grappling with feelings of helplessness and guilt, but they're also channeling that energy into action." Skylar's story became a symbol of the need for vigilance and compassion. While the community mourned her loss, they also resolved to create a safer environment for all children. The tragedy served as a painful reminder that protecting the most vulnerable members of society requires collective effort and unwavering commitment. Child neglect is one of the most common yet underreported forms of child abuse. It often goes unnoticed until it escalates into a tragedy, as seen in Skylar Gardner's case. Recognizing the signs of neglect early can save lives and prevent long-term harm to vulnerable children. Neglect can manifest in various ways, but some of the most common warning signs include poor hygiene. Children who are consistently dirty, have unwashed clothing, or emit strong odors may be living in unsanitary conditions. This is often one of the first visible indicators of neglect. Frequent absences. A child who is frequently absent from school or daycare without explanation may be left unsupervised or in unsafe environments. Behavioral changes. Sudden shifts in behavior, such as withdrawal, aggression, or extreme clinginess, can signal distress. Neglected children may also exhibit developmental delays or struggle with social interactions. Physical signs. Unexplained injuries. Signs of malnutrition, such as extreme thinness or bloated stomachs, or frostbite in colder climates, are red flags that should never be ignored. These signs, while not definitive proof of neglect, should prompt further observation and, if necessary, intervention. It's better to report suspicions and be wrong than to remain silent and risk a child's safety. If you suspect a child is being neglected, there are several steps you can take to help. 1. Observe and document. Pay attention to patterns of behavior or physical signs that suggest neglect. Keep a record of what you've noticed, including dates and specific incidents, as this information can be helpful to authority. 2. Communicate your concerns. If you have a relationship with the child's caregiver, approach them with compassion. Sometimes parents may be overwhelmed and unaware of the impact their actions are having on their children. Offering support or resources can make a difference. 3. Report to authorities. If the situation appears severe or you believe the child is in immediate danger, contact your local child protective services or law enforcement. Most states allow anonymous reporting, so you don't have to fear retaliation. 4. Engage with community resources. Encourage your community to host workshops or events that educate residents about child welfare and the importance of reporting neglect. Awareness is a powerful tool in preventing abuse. It's important to remember that reporting suspected neglect is not about punishing parents. It's about protecting children and connecting families with the help they need. The statistics surrounding child neglect are sobering. According to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, neglect accounts for approximately 60% of all child abuse cases. In 2022 alone, over 600,000 children were confirmed victims of neglect in the United States. Tragically, neglect is also the leading cause of child fatalities in abuse cases, with infants and toddlers being the most vulnerable. The long-term impacts of neglect can be devastating. Children who experience neglect are at higher risk for physical health issues, chronic malnutrition, developmental delays, and weakened immune systems are common among neglected children. Mental health challenges. Neglected children often struggle with anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, later in life. Educational struggles. Neglect can lead to poor academic performance, learning disabilities, and difficulty maintaining focus in school. Relationship difficulties. The lack of a stable, nurturing environment can hinder a child's ability to form healthy relationships as they grow older. These outcomes highlight the urgent need for early intervention and community support to break the cycle of neglect. Many cases of neglect stem from parents who are overwhelmed by financial, emotional, or social challenges. Providing resources and support can prevent neglect before it begins. Some key resources include parenting classes. Local organizations and community centers often offer free or low-cost classes to help parents develop skills and strategies for managing stress and caring for their children. Food banks and shelters. Access to basic necessities like food, clothing, and housing can alleviate some of the pressures that lead to neglect. Hotlines and support groups. National hotlines such as the Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline 1-800-4A-CHILD provide confidential support and connect families with local resources. Therapeutic services. Counseling for parents and children can address underlying issues such as trauma or substance abuse that contribute to neglect. Encouraging parents to seek help without fear of judgment is crucial. Communities that foster a culture of support and understanding are better equipped to prevent neglect and protect children. Preventing child neglect requires a collective effort. Communities must remain vigilant and proactive in identifying and addressing potential cases of neglect. Early intervention is key. Research shows that children who receive timely support are more likely to recover from the effects of neglect and lead healthy, productive lives. Dr. Karen Fields, a child psychologist, emphasizes the role of community involvement. Neglect is not just a family issue, it's a societal issue. When neighbors, teachers, and community members step in, they can change the trajectory of a child's life. It's about creating a safety net that catches children before they fall too far. Skylar Gardner's story is a heartbreaking reminder of what can happen when warning signs are ignored. By recognizing the signs of neglect, taking action, and supporting struggling families, we can prevent similar tragedies and ensure that every child has the opportunity to grow up in a safe, nurturing environment. The responsibility lies with all of us. Skylar Gardner's tragic death is not just a story of individual neglect, it is a reflection of systemic failures that allowed her suffering to go unnoticed for months. Despite clear warning signs, no intervention came in time to save her. Neighbors heard cries, daycare staff noticed absences, and even acquaintances saw the deteriorating conditions, yet no one acted decisively. This tragedy highlights the gaps in child welfare systems where overburdened caseworkers and a lack of resources often leave vulnerable children at risk. The broader implications are clear. Communities and institutions must work together to create stronger safety nets for children. This includes better training for educators, healthcare workers, and law enforcement to recognize and report neglect, as well as increased funding for child protective services to ensure timely investigations. Skylar's story is a painful reminder that the responsibility to protect children extends beyond their immediate caregivers. It is a collective duty. The Skylar's story is a call to action for all of us. It urges us to remain vigilant, to speak up when we see signs of neglect, and to advocate for systemic changes that prioritize the safety of children. Her life, though tragically short, can serve as a catalyst for change if we choose to act. Skylar's story reminds us that the most vulnerable among us depend on our vigilance. If this story moved you, please subscribe to Shadows of Crime for more investigations that shed light on these critical issues. What do you think could have been done to save Skylar? Share your thoughts in the comments below. As we remember Skylar, let us also remember the countless other children who suffer in silence. Their voices may be unheard, but their stories demand our attention. Together, we can honor their memory by ensuring no child is left behind.